Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking to help us multiply engagement and loyalty. I'm Rob Alvarez, a consultant and the founder of Professor Game and a professor of gamification and games-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EBS University, and other places around the world. And before we dive into the interview, if you're struggling with engagement in your business and are looking to find out how to make sure your users stay with you, perhaps you will find our free gamification course useful. Find it for free in the links in the description. So hey engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. We're with Dave here today. So Dave, are you prepared to engage?
I am, yes.
Let's do this. Dave is a software, Dave Faliskie,
Yes.
Faliskie is a software developer specializing in mobile apps. He's currently building Roads Audio, which is an app designed to enable asynchronous podcast-like conversations with the goal of helping people maintain deeper relationships. And he also runs a YouTube channel, One Man Startup, where he shares insights and tutorials on app development. Earlier this year, he won a competition sponsored by Global Citizens and Google with his mobile game Last Bottle, which sheds light on the often overlooked truths of recycling. So, Dave, is there anything we're missing that we should know about you?
No, I think you covered the main highlights for sure.
Amazing. So, Dave, what does a regular day with you look like? We were chatting before about, you looking into marketing, but you're a developer. So, I don't know if that's what you're normally doing nowadays or what are you up to?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, recently, actually, I guess it's a little bit different than maybe the past year for me, but a normal day, it typically will be I'll wake up and maybe the first 3 hours are doing nothing. Like maybe I'll read a little bit or just kind of get started with the day. But I'm definitely not a morning person. So yeah, the first couple hours are for sure just like slugging along, maybe email. But then I try and get some work done. And that could mean various things. It could be doing marketing stuff or actually writing code, doing development stuff. Yeah, it kind of always depends. I mean, I think as kind of like I would say like as a one-man startup, as I like to call it on the YouTube channel, you do kind of end up wearing a lot of hats. So there isn't, I guess the work itself varies a lot, but yeah, I also am recently I am training for a marathon. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. That's actually next weekend. So
wow,
that'll be my first one. So hoping to get that kind of, over with, and then that eats up quite a bit of time for sure, like training and all of that. But then I normally like work a bit in the evening as well if I didn't get things done. So it's definitely very flexible. I don't have like a set schedule. But yeah, it's great. I mean, I like that flexibility for sure.
Awesome. And you mentioned the marathon. I managed to get to the half marathon. And some months back, my back and my knee said, this is as far as we'll take you in this kind of sports. So, no more impact on us. So I didn't get to the marathon stage, but it was something I was pretty excited about training for eventually. But it's just not going to happen, man. So do a good one for me.
Yeah,
a good one as in finishing and surviving and not breaking anything.
That's the goal. Just finish and not be injured and just go slow. So that's for the first one, at least.
For me, it's interesting how I love the concept of the Ironman races, right? Like, oh my God, you do this thing and you feel like, yeah, they're like a superhuman or whatever. But then everybody I've talked to, and this seems to be a general thing, there is no way of doing that without getting a certain level of injury after the fact. So it kind of confuses me a bit. Like, why would you want to do some sporty thing that doesn't leave you? I mean, not extra tired. I get like having a week off or I don't know, even a month off. But getting even slightly injured for sure is something I would not look forward to doing after I found out this information. And I'm sure anybody who gets that far to actually even register for it knows about like even, destroying your toes or whatever. It's just interesting for me.
I guess it does kind of make sense. It's like pushing the body to the limit and it will break. And
yeah, exactly. You're actually getting it to the limit kind of situation. Yeah, totally. So Dave, you've had a run on game design with the game you mentioned before. As a developer, I'm sure you've run into these kinds of situations as well in the past. Is there a story you can tell us about failure or fail, first attempt in learning, as we like to call it as well? Because failure is not fatal, it's not final, right? We always come out on the other end. Can you tell us about that story in any of these contexts so that we can, learn some lessons with you, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, there's been many, I guess, apps and websites that I've attempted to build and failed at. And I guess you could look at it as a failure or like a learning experience. And I look at it as kind of both, but with each one, there's definitely something that comes out of it each time that goes into the next one and helps build that. So, as we kind of briefly mentioned before, like right now, I'm kind of like focusing on marketing a lot more especially for the current app I'm building. And that's something I kind of learned the harder way in a past app that I built, where it was like there was like no actual plan for marketing. And I kind of did the same thing with this one in that I built it first, or like started building it first and didn't really do the marketing up front. But it's now, it's something I'm focusing on now more, with all these failures of like building an app and thinking, oh, people are just going to download this. Of course, it's on the App Store. They'll just come and download it and everyone's going to love it. And
build it and they will come, right? That's a magical phrase we heard in that beautiful movie, but it doesn't very well apply to real life endeavors.
Like yeah. So that I think is probably a big lesson that I guess I continually learn. It's like every time it's like the importance of the marketing is shown to me. But yeah, I don't think there's anything, I guess there's nothing I like really regret though. Cause I do also think maybe you need to build the first app that's kind of awful. And maybe it's a good thing that no one actually uses it, because if your first app kind of goes viral or you get like this huge marketing traction, it's a good problem to have, but it's also something that maybe you wouldn't be ready to tackle at that early stage of just learning how to build an app.
Cool. So I love it. Like one of the things there is, it is true that we cannot see everything before it actually happens 100%. Right. But it is also true that once we realize, what might have made this app, something I really lacked there was having some form of a plan of marketing. I would even personally, from my experience, I would even dive a little bit further and say it's not just marketing, but it's also, from a product manager perspective. My past life, I was a product manager as well, and I like to refer to that as the strategies, especially like. It sounds markety to talk to users and to understand their needs and how they're using this app and how they're solving those problems. But you don't even have to use it as a marketing campaign per se. It can be like even user research and understanding, like what are the things, because you have a bunch of options, like where to go next, what's the next part of the app to develop, what to focus on, what to highlight on the app. It's always better to really know what they're thinking of it, like real potential people who might be using the app. And the earlier you do that, the earlier you get people to start using it for real, the better you'll be able to focus yourself. So I love that. I love that learning, and it's a continual learning, as you'll see.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess as one example of like kind of that, of learning that kind of the hard way with this app, I have been, the app I'm currently building, I have been asking people more of what they want those features to be, the current users, and seeing kind of what the next feature should be. And it's definitely been more helpful to go about it that way versus like being like, oh, I know people are going to want this, but then maybe no one actually does want that. So
usually we don't really know. We have great hypotheses, educated, guesses, but that's as far as it usually goes. So let's turn it around and actually go for a story of success, something that went well for you, or that you're satisfied or pleased with the results you got, to see if maybe you can share with us some of the things you think were part of that success criteria to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk a bit about the last bottle game. I think that ultimately was a success. It was part of a competition, and I did win a few of the categories in the competition. So in that regard, it was a success for, especially I guess within the context of what it was, being in that competition. And I think a few things that led to it being a useful app were that it was very simple, but it also had like a message involved in it. So there was kind of a point to the app as a whole, which I think resonates with, or it resonated with the bigger thing of this hack. It was kind of like a hackathon that it was in, and a little bit of background, I guess, of this hackathon is that it was for like sustainable development, and not even like app development, but just sustainable global development, and giving people more of a either giving them education or something that they could do to help the environment. And then the app that I ended up doing was kind of almost like an education on the way that recycling works. So but it was kind of kept simple, and really the way that the game ended up working was that it made it very difficult to win. So you couldn't actually win the game easily, which was supposed to mirror the way that recycling is kind of happening in the real world, where even if you do recycle something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get reused, and kind of get people. The idea, I guess, was kind of to get people frustrated by using the app, and then
that's the target you were aiming for. So if you got them frustrated, that's actually the result that was necessary, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think having like kind of that like thread of a story or thread of an idea within a project can make it successful, or be almost like the app will stand for something more than just the game itself, or just the initial purpose of what the app is.
Sounds fantastic. I love it, because if you think about it, one of the things that you're saying there is, that what made your game successful was making it not just a game, right? So, and there, don't get me wrong, there's huge successes in games that are just games, right? They don't have to have a message, but precisely in this world that where we are living right now in Professor Game, where the way we think of games is they're either a game with a purpose, as you were saying before, or they are to gather inspiration from that game to do something that actually reaches something. And this can be, ultimately a high objective in the sense, as you were saying, like recycling and saving or helping save the environment, or anything like could be a business metric, right? Like, how do I get my business to take off, right? How do I get my app to take off, and gamifying that process could be something that could be very, very interesting. After that experience that you got there, right? I'm curious, like that was a hackathon, so it was probably, and I think it's a good thing when we get into the hackathon mentality, if we need to get something out there fast, quick, so that people can see it. And there, if what you do with that is get it in front of potential real users, then you can get some feedback and continue building. And if you maybe not the stress involved of, you have like 2 days or something like that of a hackathon, but if you keep on building with that same style of rhythm, right? And again, getting feedback and building more, getting feedback and building more, maybe it's something, right? I would argue it's something that can get you further, faster, and better, in fact. But I don't know if that makes sense to you, but especially I was curious to, like, what was your process maybe in the hackathon, or if you have some sort of process for developing, if we have thought about developing a game ever, what's the process? What does that look like? Do you have anything like that you could share?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this game specifically, I guess within this hackathon was really the first game I actually developed. So normally most of the apps and websites I've done are more non-game related. Sometimes there'll be like a little bit of game features within them, but not really. So yeah, I guess I could tell you about the process that I went about building or coming to this game. Would that be good? Or
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, the first thing I was thinking was it would be, the original idea was much different than what it ended up being. So originally it was going to be kind of like a sorting of trash, or a sorting of like trash to recycling. Like a bottle would fall down maybe, and you could choose, should this get recycled or should this go to the trash, and kind of doing like a recycling sorting thing like that. And then I started doing a little bit of research into like what would be sorted correctly. So really doing research into, I guess, the specific background of recycling, which then led me to kind of figure out that recycling isn't really super efficient. And then so with that in mind, once I kind of learned that new feature, or it's not even a feature, it's it's really a bug of like the recycling process. But once I learned that that information, I guess, then the idea of the game changed completely. And it was like, oh, how do you get this kind of emotion that I just learned online is shown in a game? How can I get people to kind of see that this is a broken system by playing a game that is basically a broken game, or gets them that same kind of like frustration that's that like mirrors the real world. So then, yeah, once that idea was there, it was way more of a compelling thing to build as well. Like that seemed way more exciting than just building like a sorting kind of like. Really, the sorting thing was a pretty basic idea, I would say. Like most people would probably be able to think of that. And then the actual idea, I think, is a little bit more maybe novel or like slightly more creative in some ways. So yeah, I think part of the process I would go about with building the next game would be something like that, like trying to come up with something that is different, that is like novel and has, again, like that message or some sort of message to it, but also has like something kind of new or different. And then
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say like that's for me, it's like really understanding what it is that you want to get to. And sometimes there's small things that, you know, as you were saying, it's not the overarching, like what's all the whole recycling. Like you don't want people to know everything about recycling, right? Because that's not necessarily something that you can give you really that super focus. It's what's that thing about recycling that you want to make sure people understand. It's that thing. It's not everything. If you manage to do that thing right, you can really make sure that you achieve something. Instead of trying to, sort of boil the ocean, you grab, a cup and you boil that and say, oh, I boiled a bit, which is what I was actually really able to manage.
Yeah, I think that definitely also, I agree with that completely. Like picking the one thing that you want to show or exploit in a way in the game, and then only going after that one thing. It definitely keeps it more focused. Like keeping a focus is, I think, especially in like a hackathon or something, or a small version of a product that you're trying to make, it's very important to have like one focused thing that you're just trying to do, and get that one thing done.
So after that experience that you had, there you said, there's the idea, and then you're actually building, you're doing the build, the creation of the game. How do you go about it? Is it, you think about the theme, you think about game, like what do you do after you have understood what it is that's the message, as you were saying, that you want to get through? What will be a next step when you did it back then, or if you would be able to, looking forward to do it again?
Yeah, I guess the next step, I think, well, for me, like the next step was really just starting to draw it out. So like it immediately became more like practical. It was like as soon as there was like enough of an idea, the next step would be, actually putting like, I normally use like an iPad and just draw like just really rough sketches of what the game would look like.
Cool.
So yeah, I try to get to like the practical kind of like building side of things as fast as possible as well. So I don't know if it would be useful to talk about like how in depth of like the technical stuff it gets, but I can go into that. Or do you mean more of like the general game mechanics or like ideas of
how you came up with the ideas? Because like our audience is not going to be like, I am a software engineer, but I don't think most of the people in the audience actually have the technical expertise to really dive into those depths at this point, at least.
Yeah, that for sure makes sense. I guess like looking at other games that I've played would be one component of that. So like, how can I not reinvent the wheel and maybe use some aspects of other games to get this message across? And then again, this is kind of what I do in like the prototyping. So I'm doing this kind of just drawing, and I'll, consider like at one point I considered it being kind of like a Mario like game where the screen is moving and you're just the character there. And then it ended up becoming one of those like falling games where you're avoiding obstacles, which is another common, I think, game pattern. So the game, I guess itself wasn't like a unique gameplay, but I was using and looking at other game mechanics that other popular games use. And I think that's a useful thing as well, especially if it's like maybe your first game to kind of copy portions of other games that people might be familiar with and then make them your own or put a twist on it to make it your own.
Makes total sense. Thank you for that, Dave. And Dave, after hearing these questions, right? Maybe you've when you did your research and when you've been thinking about creating, like you were saying before, maybe gamifying some of the features you do with your apps or creating the game or a feature game. Maybe you have, I don't know, found inspiration somewhere or heard of someone who does a great job, in your opinion, on doing this. Is there sort of a future guest that you would like to hear answering these questions, maybe to get even more inspiration for you and hopefully as well for the engagers?
I mean, one potential guest I think could be really interesting is if you got in contact with someone from Global Citizen, which is actually one of the people that put on that hackathon, because what they do is they're trying to like gamify this whole social movement of environmental sustainability, and they actually have their own app that they use and reward people for doing real things in life. So they kind of are, they're in that gamified world. And I heard a little bit about what they do through this competition, but it would be very interesting to hear more about how they're really using these game concepts and like applying it directly to a very hard and big problem and getting people kind of motivated through that avenue.
Awesome. If eventually you sort of have somebody that was your contact, or I don't know, anybody in there, that would be amazing to get an introduction. Sounds like very interesting stuff that they're doing there. Yeah,
definitely.
And Dave, talking of inspiration and people who you might be interested in, is there a book that you recommend the engagers, this audience, interested in game design, gamifying, and so on?
Yeah, actually, probably. I could give you one fiction and one nonfiction, depending on how which people prefer. But I found Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I don't know if, I believe it's called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And that is a fiction book, but it's about kind of like a game designer and the story of these two people really who are building games. And that actually inspired me a bit to build this Last Bottle game. I felt like some of the inspiration came out of that book.
Nice.
Because at one point in the book, they kind of had a game that they built where like the end of the game, the outcome of the game was like made you kind of, it wasn't what you thought. So that kind of that gave me the inspiration to make a game that was like meant to be frustrating. That book definitely. And then
big inspiration in your game.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe on more of like a practical, like technical level, there's a book called Irresistible, which is, it talks a good bit about game development, but even more just specifically app development and how really like kind of like the psychology of how people are addicted to apps now. And I think knowing that information, especially if you're building a game, is very useful. Because there's general concepts in there that are good to know, not necessarily to like fully use them yourself and get people addicted to your app, but it's good to think that way, or like what gets people kind of like addicted to using the same product over and over.
Makes sense. There's when you were describing the book, I was thinking of the book Hooked by Nir Eyal.
Yeah.
In the same vein, I would say.
It's definitely similar. Yeah.
Totally. Makes sense. Love that. And, in this world of, game design and gamification and all that, I know, your deep expertise is more on the development side, but is there something that you would say was your superpower, something that you do better, at least than most of the other people around you?
Yeah, I guess my quote unquote superpower would be along the lines of being able to kind of get something up and running quick or prototyped quick or built. And even more being able to kind of build almost like more than just one one sliver of it. So being able to kind of do a decent job at the design and a decent job at the gameplay and a decent job at kind of like all aspects of a full featured product, which I think is quite hard for most people to do.
That's certainly something that is difficult in many different ways. So thank you for sharing that, Dave. And in this, in this same vein of recommendations that we've been discussing, I'm going to actually change the difficulty, right? We're going to go for what would you say is your favorite game?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really actually don't play that many games anymore, unfortunately. Really now the most time I spend playing games is actually when I'm flying. So in the airplane, I have a few games that I'll play. Which now really, I mean, the big one that comes to mind is like the balloons tower defense I feel like I play that every time I fly. But probably my favorite game would be Mario, I guess, in historically. That I definitely spent a lot of time playing that, like as a kid, and the various different versions of it, like starting on the Game Boy and then all the way through to even like the Nintendo Switch. But yeah, so I like those games. I never really got too deep into like the more, I guess, robust games. And now I feel like you can play a game and it's like you're like, it feels like a whole nother world. But yeah, I've always kind of been more of the casual game, or like that Mario style kind of like simpler type of games.
Makes sense. Actually, I never like sometimes people, when they see the title of the podcast, what I do, my experience is, you must be like a top gamer or something. It's like, no. If esports had been invented when I was young enough, right? There's a period when you get like, I think it's like 25, top esports players start declining. So if that was a thing when I was 25 or before, I would not have been a famous esports player, even if I had wanted to. I think I did not have that in me. I was more of a, Mario and even competitive games. Like I love to play Fortnite, but I'm not going to be at the top of the leaderboard anytime soon, or probably ever in any case. But it's
I mean, those people, they're playing all day. It is like their full-time job, so it makes sense that they're much better. You need
absolutely,
but 100 hours a weekend.
Cristiano Ronaldo, trains at a level beyond everybody else. But I'm pretty sure that if I had trained at his level, I would still not be half the footballer he is, right? Or Messi. Right?
That's a good point.
Fans of everybody. Like that's what I'm saying. Like there are some features that get you to that super top stuff. Like I could probably get to be pretty good. I don't even know if fourth league or third league or whatever. But I would probably never even play in a premier top league. The team, not even be a good player on that, like just be there, like sitting on the bench. I'm not even sure I would get there, no matter how much I trained, right? We can always get to be better.
I feel like the same.
Like you can get to be a lot better in many things, but there are some things where you can be at the top of the game, and there's others like no matter how hard you try, you're gonna get somewhere. You're not gonna get as far as some other people have. Maybe some natural talents. I don't know exactly what it is, but I don't know. Maybe it's my mind limiting me. I'm not sure, but
I almost feel like with that kind of stuff, it's like the people that get obsessed with it. They have like I guess maybe there is a tendency. They have a tendency to it, but then that does make them much better. And then just by the fact that you're not like obsessed with it, you won't get as good as them.
Makes sense. So Dave, thanks a lot for sharing, your story, your insights, all the stuff you've been doing. We're getting to the end of the interview. So, it's your time. You have any final words? You want to lead us somewhere to, I don't know, some call to action. I don't know where we can find out more about you, your work, your app. It's your time.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess if you want to connect with me on X or Twitter, it's just Dave Faliskie. And then my app is Rhodes Audio. If you want to check that out, that's the main app I'm building now. And it's kind of like a private podcast app. So you can create a podcast with your friends and chat asynchronously through that. But I guess ultimately I would say if anyone is trying to build something or has an inclination to build a game or build an app or really try doing anything new, the best thing to do is just to actually start and just give it a go, give it a try. And maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but at least you I mean, yeah, even spend a week on it and see what happens. And maybe you'll hate it, maybe you'll love it, and then go from there.
Makes a lot of sense. Love that. So thanks again, Dave, for sharing your insights, your experience with us today. However, Dave and Engagers, as you know, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Hey, Engagers, and thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And since you are into gamification and game-inspired solutions, how about you go into the free gamification course that we have for you? Just go to professorgame.com/free gamification course, all one word, professorgame.com/free gamification course, and get started today for free. After that, we will also be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, please remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.